Make sure that that works and that's popped up for everybody. Okay, I'm going to get us started and then I'm going to hand the reins over to the true lead of tonight's program, which is Hannah Thornton here. But again, hopefully everybody can hear my voice and can see our screen. We are recording tonight's event so that if you are not able to join live or not able to capture all of this wonderful information that we'll have with us today, tonight, you can go back and watch the recording again. And Hannah, you want to say anything to introduce the program for tonight?
Yeah, so I'm super excited for tonight's webinar. We're going to be going into some really great information regarding native pollinators, and this ties into our Pollinators for Texas initiative, which is our partnership with HEB. So yeah, I'm just really excited, and I know we're going to get some great information that may help with your projects or just in general if you want to, freshen up on your pollinator information. So, all right, Mary Pearl, if you'll.
Absolutely. So as with any Master Naturalist webinar, we always want to reiterate our virtual meeting etiquette. This helps to set the standard for how tonight's going to go with our webinar. If you are new to our WebEx, you as an attendee cannot unmute or share your video, and that's intentional as we want to give the spotlight to our two speakers that are joining us tonight. So please use chat box to ask any questions. I'll be helping to moderate the chat tonight, and then we'll verbally ask both Wizzy and Craig those questions. So help me with your chat, keeping those chat questions on topic, professional, respectful, and help me interpret them with your best spelling, grammar, and lack of acronyms as possible so that I can ask the right question that you intend. Tonight may run just a little over an hour. I keep hearing from Craig and Wizzy. They've just got a ton of information to share. But I'm not going to stop you guys because you guys really are the experts. The only thing that will stop us is our stomachs growling and getting ready for dinner if you haven't eaten already. If you are a master naturalist logging in for tonight's live event or watching this as a recording, you can count the hours watched under advanced training. There's a little tool at the bottom in the yellow box to help you log your advanced training hours there. Grab a quick snapshot, and I'll also be copying that text into the chat here in just a little bit. All right, Hannah. Again, I'll capture that chat and capture that text and put it in the chat so that if you've missed it, you can just copy it straight out of the chat box. Again, just some final wrap up before we get into tonight's content. We do like surveys with our program, making sure that we're meeting the needs of our funding program, meeting the needs of our agencies. And one of those opportunities to survey the attendees of tonight's webinar is linked on the screen here. I'll also be dropping that link in the chat room. But this helps us to remain eligible for funding and helps to pay for events like that. So if you can grab that QR code, great. And if not, I'll also be dropping that in the chat here shortly.
All right, so as I said, this webinar tonight is part of our Pollinators for Texas initiative. This project's purpose is to enhance native pollinator conservation through chapter-led initiatives that increase habitat coverage and pollinator awareness. And we really hope that all of you are considering applying. This is a really great opportunity. This is a HEB and Texas Master Naturalist partnership, and for those of you who couldn't make it to the application review webinar, there's some really exciting news that we're actually, HEB is donating $80,000 this year, so that's really big, and I think that's just a reflection of how meaningful y'all's work is. This means that chapters this year may apply for financial awards of up to $4,000 this year. And so our vision of this is continuing on from last year. We hope to be able to expand the impact on native pollinator conservation by providing support to more chapters across Texas with their pollinator projects. These projects can span from habitat development to restoration to educational outreach. So for those of you interested in applying, applications are currently open and they close June 1st. And this is just a timeline of how the initiative will look this year. So award notifications would probably go out around August, And the project implementation. So when you'd be working on your project would be from September of 2025 to July 2026. And if you are interested, this link takes you directly to the application on our website. Mary Pearl, if you can drop that in the chat as well. Thank you. All right, so getting into the really important stuff tonight, what I'm really excited for is our speakers. So we have two great guest speakers tonight. First, we'll have Wizzy Brown, and she's from Texas A&M AgriLife. She's an extension, a senior program specialist with AgriLife Extension. And Wizzy has received her bachelor's and master's in entomology. She's an expert in native pollinators, garden pests, landscape pests, and urban and structural pests. Not only is Wizzy well versed within entomology, but she's also serves as an advisor for one of our Texas Master Naturalist chapters. And so I'm very excited to hear from her. And then next we'll have Craig Hensley, and he's part of Texas Nature Trackers as a biologist, and he's additional to that, he's part of Texas Parks and Wildlife's Community Stewardship and Engagement Program. Craig has been a naturalist and educator for more than 40 years. He served as the park interpreter and natural resource specialist at Guadalupe River State Park and Honey Creek Natural Area prior to becoming a wildlife biologist. With his work as one of the two Texas nature trackers, he engages with the public to involve them with community science. So I'm really excited to hear from them, and I know it's going to be great presentations. I'll just go ahead and forward this over. If Wizzy, if you're comfortable with starting us off tonight. Okay, great. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Oh, I got to figure this out again.
See, it should be.
Oh,
it should be sending it your way. We're almost there, and we got it.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, I can't see anything on my screen other than this, so if there are questions, I will answer them at the end.
That sounds great.
I
we'll
can't
keep
see
track
chat.
of them for you.
All right, fantastic. All right, hold on a minute. Okay. So a lot of people, when they think about pollinators, they think automatically, well, usually of honeybees, which are great pollinators. They're very efficient at what they do, but they are not native. They were brought into the North America and United States by settlers. We have a lot of native bees that are also excellent pollinators, and they're actually much better at pollinating our native plants because they have evolved and adapted as they have progressed throughout time. So the insect orders that have pollinators in them are going to be the Hymenoptera. So those are going to be our bees, of course, but also wasps and also sometimes ants. The other big one that a lot of people like are the Lepidoptera. So those are going to be mainly the butterflies and skippers, but we also have some moths that are going to be pollinators. We have beetles. A lot of people don't think about beetles. And then the last one is one that really kind of blows people's mind. And those are going to be the Diptera, which are the flies. And you know, I always get the question, what good are mosquitoes? Mosquitoes are a pollinator. So there is at least one redeeming quality about them. We're going to start off with the beetles. So with these are in the order Coleoptera. These are some common pollinators that we have. On the left-hand side, we have a flower scarab. And these are related. They're in the same family as the May and June beetles that unfortunately are emerging already. But these are going to often go to flowers to get pollen, and they do have hairs on their body. And even though they are consuming the pollen, usually those flowers are making enough pollen that it's not going to really be problematic that they're eating some of the pollen. They're just going to, you know, pick up the pollen on their body that they're not eating, and they will transfer that. Next, on the one to the right of that is an example of a blister beetle, We have a whole bunch of different kinds of blister beetles, and they are, again, pollinators, but you have to be careful if you come across blister beetles because they do release a substance when they're startled that can cause your skin to blister. So that's one of those things, you might not want to pick those ones up. And then I think everybody's favorite, or at least one of everybody's favorite, are the fireflies and the lightning bugs. Those ones are ones that not all of them will bioluminesce, but a lot of them are going to have that section of the abdomen that will actually light up and glow when they do their flash patterns. But these are going to be more kind of a softer winged beetle, and they tend to come out at dusk. But with them, even though they are a pollinator, they are going to need certain requirements. So they're going to be more in moist, maybe wetland areas, because that's where they're going to be laying their eggs. And then on the far right, we have a soldier beetle. These are beneficial as pollinators and predators. So you get a twofer on this one. This is another beetle that has somewhat softened wings, and you can see there, that one's really brightly colored, but the wings are often a little bit short, and you can see, excuse me, you can see some of the abdomen, but long legs, long antennae, and a lot of times you're going to see them sitting on flowers. Again, with beetles, they really like the pollen, and that's a lot of times what they're going after. So when we look at beetles overall, the beetles themselves, they were probably the first insect pollinators of plants way back in the Jurassic period. And they tend to like bowl or open shaped flowers, which if you think about beetles and their body structure and kind of they're big and awkward and heavy, it makes sense that they need flowers that have a large landing area. And they also like bowl ones because, and especially if you talk about, like, if you've ever seen a prickly pear flower, the Kern's flower beetles, which are a type of flower scarab, they get down in there and they're just rolling around in the pollen. It's just like they're in a little swimming pool of pollen, and they're just really, really good. But the beetles are going to like it when they have everything kind of out in the open. And while the lily that you see in the picture there isn't necessarily one that they would be rolling around to get pollen, the beetles in the picture are interested in other things, not necessarily eating pollen at the moment. The coloration of the flowers, they tend to like duller colors, so white, pale greens, maybe some of the yellowy green colors, but more of the subtle coloration of the flowers. They do like strongly scented flowers leaning towards pretty smells, and they are going to prefer flowers that are open during the day because that's typically when the majority of the beetles are going to be active. They really don't care so much about nectar, so moderate nectar producers, they're not really there for the nectar. They are going to be there for that pollen. And as far as the flowers, they can either be a very large flower itself, or you can have a small cluster of flowers, like an umbel shape of yarrow or something like that. Our diptera are going to be generalist foragers. They tend to have sparse hairs on their body. There are some that have more prominent hairs. A lot of those are going to be more of the muscoid flies, which are going to be similar in kind of the housefly shape. That's a type of muscoid fly. And then, of course, all flies are going to have two wings. Well, not all. Most flies are going to have two wings, and that's how you can tell them that they're flies. When we're looking at the flowers that flies are going to be attracted to, again, we're going to go towards more muted, pale colors, or they may go towards darker colors. So dark purples, dark browns. You may get some, again, depending on the fly, that go towards more yellow and orange colors. Sometimes they are going to be flecked with translucent patches. A lot of the staphyliids are going to have translucent patches on those. And then as far as smells that flies are attracted to, that's usually stuff that we're not necessarily going to enjoy as humans, because they go for kind of grosser smells. So things that smell like dead animals, or maybe like humus of some sort, where it's that kind of earthy smell, or dung. They can also be attracted to things that have kind of a rotting or a rancid sap smell. They aren't looking for nectar guides. We'll talk about that with some of the other insects in a minute. And they are going to be in usually flowers that have traps in them, or they are funnel shaped. And you can see the fly there, that's on an umbel flower, which those are just kind of little funnel shaped flowers that are clustered together. Our common diptera that we're dealing with, we're going to start again on the left. The tachinid flies, this is one of our muscoid flies, so they have a lot of big hairs. And with the tachinids, this is another one that you get a twofer. So they are going to be not only pollinators, but they are also going to be parasitoids. They are going to lay their eggs in other insects. And so it's a way that you can control whatever or manage pests that are in your landscape. The one to the right of that is one that's really, really common, but often overlooked because it is very small. That is a long-legged fly. And these are also beneficial as both pollinators and predators. The one that I see commonly is the one that you see in the picture. And they are very, very beautiful when you look at them up close, because they're like a metallic yellow-green color. And then they have a blue kind of metallic tip on the abdomen, large eyes, 2 wings, and of course, long legs, because that goes along with their name. The one next to that is on the Purple Heart is going to be a hoverfly or a flower fly. These are in the family Syrphidae. So they're also called syrphid flies. These come in a wide variety. I showed this one right here. That's also a syrphid fly. And a lot of the syrphid flies are going to be bee and wasp mimics, but you can tell that they are not bees or wasps because they only have 2 wings. The one that you see in the photo there on this picture, on this slide, is going to be a little bit different because it doesn't mimic a bee or a wasp, and it has a more elongated abdomen. But this one is one that I see really commonly in my landscape. And the immature stage of this one is actually going to be predatory on aphids. So it's a good one to have around. And then I had to put one in that people tend to think of as a pest, and that is a housefly. So that one's going to be on the far right. I know in the summertime, we often get very annoyed that there are houseflies flying around everywhere, but these are also going to be taking nectar from flowers, and they can get pollen on the hairs on their body, and they can transfer that from flower to flower and plant to plant. Probably everyone's favorite group of insects, if you're just kind of getting into entomology, is the Lepidoptera. These are going to be the butterflies and moths. When we're looking at flowers for the Lepidopteras, they are pretty much open to anything. They have that really elongated proboscis. It's a siphoning mouth part, and they can access pretty much anything. And so they can be on open shaped flowers. They can be on ray or flat shaped flowers, umbels, tubulars. It's just kind of, they are designed to access whatever to get that nectar. When we're looking at the 2, butterflies are going to gravitate towards flowers that are open during the day. Moths, depending on which ones you're talking about, are going to gravitate either Some of them are daytime flying moths, but usually moths are going to be active at night. And so those are going to go towards the flowers that are open in the evening. And generally it can differ in colors and fragrance. With flower colors for butterflies, they're going to go for usually a lot of the bright stuff. So pinks and reds and yellows and oranges. They can also go on white, of course. Moths tend to be more attracted to, or at least the nighttime flying moths, they're going to be attracted to white flowers or more light colored flowers. So it might be, if it's a yellow, it's going to be like a pale yellow, or if it's green, it's going to be a pale green. So more dull colors, not like really bright and showy. So when we're looking at this, our first one, we have a selection here. So on the far left, we have, I wanted to include a different fritillary. Everybody is so used to seeing the Gulf fritillary. This one is one that doesn't seem to get as much love. So starting on the left, we have a variegated fritillary. It also is going to lay its eggs on passion vine. So if you want the larvae, then you can grow passion vine and it will come into your yard. But when we're looking at the adults, those are going for nectar. And with variegated fritillaries, they are going to be more of a speckled color, whereas the Gulf fritillary on the upper side of the wings, it's going to be kind of all orange. With these ones, it's going to be orange and brown and black and kind of have this different pattern. And then on the underside, which is what you see in this photo, they don't have that really bright kind of iridescent white marking that the Gulf fritillary does. So the front wing is going to again have that mottled pattern, and then that hind wing is going to have some white markings on it, but theirs is more of a creamy white. It doesn't have that iridescent sheen to it. Over from that, we have a white-lined sphinx moth. The larvae of these are going to be hornworms. So depending on how you feel about them and what they're feeding on, you might not like them in your garden because they can eat a lot when they're in the larger stages. The moths here are going to also be called not only sphinx moths, but they are also called hummingbird moths because they are often mistaken for hummingbirds. These are very large moths, and they have that kind of spindle-shaped body and almost kind of like airplane-looking wings where they're kind of tapered and, I don't know, pointed at the ends. And you can see how it's kind of sitting there. But these are, depending on which species you're talking about, some of them are going to be daytime flying moths. Some of them are going to be active in the evening and at night. But sphinx moths are great to have in the landscape. To the right of that, we have a skipper. And this one is a really common one that we have in the area. This is the fiery skipper. Skippers are a type of butterfly, but you can see that they hold their wings a little bit different than regular butterflies do. And if you look at their antennae, they're going to actually have hooks on the end of the antennae, whereas butterflies are going to have knobs. So with the fiery skipper, it's usually a orange color, hence the name fiery. But sometimes it's more of a duller orange, more of a brownish orange than like really, really bright, like a Gulf fritillary would be. And then on the right-hand side, we have a pearl crescent. These are a smaller butterfly. They're still visible and whatnot, but they are very pretty. This is one of the crescent and checker spot butterflies, and a lot of them will look like this. They're like browns and yellows and oranges, and they have all of these different patterns on their wings. They also have, if you look closely at their antennae, they're going to have black and white striped antennae, which are super, super cute. And since we have so many, and everybody loves them, I threw in some more. So again, we're going to start on the left. I am originally from Ohio, so I had to throw in a common buckeye just because it's Buckeye and Ohio is the Buckeye state. But the common buckeye is a very common butterfly that we see. I think that they're very pretty. I would say that this one is more of a medium-sized butterfly. It is a brown butterfly with orange on the hind wings. It has 2 orange bars with some blue markings in between that on the front edge of the front wing. And then it's also going to have those really beautiful eye spots on the wings. And you can see those eye spots on both the top of the wing and on the underside of the wing. Closely related to the monarch butterfly are the queens. They also are going to lay their eggs on milkweed. So they're one of those milkweed butterflies. And since the monarch gets so much press, I decided to put the queen in here. So the queens are also going to be the same color. I think that they're a little more dark orange than the monarchs. They don't tend to be as bright. And the wing venation is not defined like a monarch. So when you look at a monarch butterfly, you can see the wing venation because it's outlined in black. With queens, they really don't have that. And then queens are also going to have all of that white speckling on their wing. The one to the right of that is a red admiral. This is the one that I see all the time. We have like a big kind of emergence in the spring, and we have a big emergence in the fall. And every time I see these flying around when I'm walking my dog, I'm like, I can't remember the name. I always want to call them painted ladies, and they're not painted ladies. So you think I would learn by now. I've been doing this for a really long time. But butterflies are not my favorite. I understand that's just the way it goes. But red admirals are very, very beautiful butterflies. They're going to be this almost like chocolatey brown color, and they have orange markings that go along the hind wings. They have orange bars that go down on the front wings, and then they're going to have white speckling at the tip of their front wings. They also have some small coloration at the tip of the hind wing, like towards the body. That's usually like yellow, and there might be some blue. And they also have some blue coloration on the underside of the wings that are absolutely pretty. And then on the far right, one of my favorite, this is one of our smaller butterflies, the hair streaks. This one is a great purple hair streak, and these have little hair-like projections that come off of the tip of the wings, which is why they get the name hair streak. And for this one, I'm going to describe the underside of the wings because that's usually how they sit at the flower. So when you see them on a flower, they're typically sitting there with their wings folded over their abdomen like that. And they're essentially kind of rubbing their wings together. And that is essentially a way that they can trick predators into thinking that those 2 little hairs at the tip of the wings are antennae. And so if something goes to bite it, that butterfly can actually fly away, and then they're just going to be missing part of their wings. So they always, well, they don't always, but usually when you see them, they're going to have their wings folded up. So with this one, they are going to be a really dark kind of steel gray, almost black color. And then they have that bright blue purple. I think it looks more blue than purple, but they're called a great purple hair streak because somebody thought it was purple. It's on the front wing, but it is at the back part of that front wing. And so sometimes it may be actually covered by the hind wing, depending on where they are at moving their wings around. And then they're also going to have those 3 kind of orange spots towards the body as well. Going into our Hymenoptera, these are going to be our bees and wasps. The wasps that we typically are looking at are going to be honey wasps, paper wasps, mud daubers, and yellow jackets. Those are going to be the most common ones. As far as social bees, those are going to be bumblebees, which are native, and then the western honeybee, which is non-native. I'm not really going to talk about that because I think everybody knows what they look like already. And then we have our solitary bees. A lot of people overlook our solitary bees, but they are so incredibly important within the landscape as pollinators. And I think it's really important that we provide them with resources. I know usually when people are like, save the bees, they're talking about honeybees, but they need to save other bees as well. So things like mason bees, leafcutter bees, digger bees, longhorn bees. My personal favorite are the sweat bees. And, you know, there's so many more. So when we're looking at Hymenoptera, typically with bees, the flower colors that they're going for are going to be blue, violet into the ultraviolet range. Bees do not see red. So if you're planting red flowers in there and they're attracted, or you see them on red flowers, they're not seeing that red color. And it's kind of like red-green color blindness. It's not that they just, the flower doesn't disappear. It's that they don't perceive it as red. It may be that if they're on a red flower that has a very fruity or floral scent that they're attracted to, it might be that that flower has UV things that we can't see with our eyesight that are actually attracting those bees in there. When we're looking at shapes for them, they're going to go for flat umbels. So the cluster of the little tubular flowers, they go for horizontal flowers like you see with the wasp there, or things that have a lip. So if you think about like salvia, that has the little stacked flowers, but those flowers have a lip, and that kind of gives the bee a place to land and then access the nectar. Wasps, on the other hand, they're going to go for yellows, greens, some whites, and pinks. And they, both bees and wasps, are going to go for a floral smell. And then wasps are going to go for things that have readily available nectar. They don't tend to have the tongue-like mouth part that bees have, but wasps are still going, as adults, they're going for that nectar. But again, with wasps, they're going to be provisioning their nests or feeding their offspring insects. So you get a twofer with them. So you get that predator and the pollinator. So when we're looking at our wasps, we're going to start on the left. And this one isn't native, but it is a very common one. That is the Guinea paper wasp. When we're looking at paper wasps, they are going to be a reddish brown color, but some of them will have yellow markings like you see in the picture there. Those are going to chew wood fiber, and they're going to make that single layer paper nest. These are social, so they are going to defend that nest. And so, you know, I wouldn't recommend going up and disturbing it. They're fun to watch though. To the right of that, and those get, I should go back, those get about, I'm going to say an inch or so in length. Mexican honey wasps, that's the next one. I love these ones so much. They're adorable. These are very small. I'm going to say maybe 1/4 of an inch to 1/3 of an inch in length as adults. They are mostly a black color, but they're going to have that yellow ring around the tip of the abdomen. They have the yellow striping, and their abdomen is teardrop shaped. These are also going to make a paper nest, but they are going to incorporate branches and stuff through that because they are going to collect nectar and they will store honey in that nest. So they're using the branches that they incorporate in that nest to help support the weight of that nest. To the right of that, we have the most common mud dauber that I see around my house is the yellow-legged mud dauber. Mud daubers, there's a whole bunch of them. These are in the family Specidae and Cabronidae. They are going to make nursery areas. These are solitary. So our paper wasps, honey wasps, and yellow jackets are all going to be social. The mud daubers, on the other hand, are solitary. So they are going to construct that nursery area. They'll provision it with insects or spiders, depending on the species, and then they lay an egg on it, they seal it off, and they move on to a new area to start doing the same thing. And so those larvae that hatch out of the eggs will eat the insects that are provisioned in there, and they are going to then emerge out the following year. So if you want them in your landscape the following year to help you with predation and pollination and all that stuff, you need to leave those mud tubes alone until the following year. And then yellow jacket wasps are going to be on the right. These are about a 1/2 inch in length. They are yellow and black in color. Also make a chewed wood fiber nest, but theirs is going to be completely enclosed, and they are cavity nesters. So they will be in old rodent burrows, underneath tree stumps, under sheds, in wall voids, abandoned birdhouses, all different stuff like that. So these are all going to be beneficial, not only as pollinators, because those adults are going to collect nectar for their energy source, but they are also going to help manage with other stuff, except for the Mexican honey wasp. That one's just straight up nectar. Looking at our bees, I tried to pick some of the common ones that people may see but may not necessarily pay attention to. Starting on the left, we have a longhorn bee. They are called longhorn bees because they have very long antennae in the males. Again, they are going to access that nectar, and all of these, well, not all of these. So the two on the left, so the longhorn furrow and sweat bee, are going to be solitary, but they may be communal. So if they're creating a nest or nursery area, it may be in the same or similar area as others of their kind because it's a good nesting area. The bumblebees, on the other hand, they are a true social insect, which means that they have cooperative care of the young, they have division of labor, they have overlapping generations and things like that. In the next to the longhorn bee, we have a smaller bee. This is a often overlooked because it is small. It is a furrow bee. And these are going to, again, they have bees. So all bees, I guess I need to back up. All bees are going to have hairs on their body. That's one of the ways that we can tell them apart from the wasps. Wasps have very sparse hairs. Bees tend to have more hairs. They may be difficult to see, but they do have those hairs. So they're going to collect that pollen. And then for furrow bees, they're actually going to store that in hairs that are on their hind legs, and they can use that to carry back to provision their nests for their offspring. To the right of that, we have an American bumblebee. And we have actually 9 species of bumblebees that are found in Texas. And if you want a key to them, Texas Parks and Wildlife has a great one online that you can find. And it can tell you how to identify all of those different bumblebees. But bumblebees are going to actually overwinter as a mated queen. Those queens emerge out in the early spring, and then they're going to search out old rodent burrows or old abandoned burrows, cavity spaces and stuff like that. They may even find like an old bee nest, and they will start their new colony in there. So that queen is going to lay a few eggs. She takes care of those. And then when those hatch out, they turn into the workers, and then she just goes on to lay eggs. So that is a social insect there. And they do store nectar. Bumblebees do not make honey, but they do store nectar. It's not for long periods of time. It's usually just a few days worth. They're not storing honey like honeybees do, where they're trying to make enough to last through the winter. Since the bumblebee colonies die off over the winter, they don't need to store that much. And then on the right-hand side, we have one of my favorites. Those are the sweat bees. These ones, again, usually a very small bee. They have more of a elongated, skinny body. A lot of them are going to be metallic. We do have some that are black, but you get pretty metallic bronze colors like you see in the picture there. You get blues, you get greens. These ones were ones that I was always charmed by them when I was a kid, because, you know, you're outside playing and you're sweating and doing whatever, and they'll come and land on your skin, and they are actually getting the salt from your sweat, and that's what they're interested in. And as long as you leave them alone, you know, they're going to do their thing. So while bees and wasps are capable of stinging, if they're foraging at flowers, you generally don't have to worry about them, because they're more interested in, and they're not defending anything. Some more of the ones that we have on the far left, we have a cuckoo bee. These ones are going to be creating their nursery area in the ground. And they are going to typically be yellow and black in color, but they are going to be more of a dull black. Very cool bees, and they are going to usually have, I'm trying to think of how to, I just lost my train of thought completely. So I'm just going to move on. Small carpenter bee. And so I'm going to do a 2-1 here. So we have on the left in the middle, we have a small carpenter. On the right hand middle, southern carpenter bee. And those ones are big. So when we're talking about the southern bee, those ones are going to be the size of a bumblebee, whereas the small carpenter bees are going to be maybe about the size of a honeybee, sometimes smaller. And again, these come in different colors with different kind of hairs on their body. The one that you see of the small carpenter bee there, that one is a metallic green color with a more black abdomen. They are going to carry their pollen on their hind legs. The southern carpenter bee, on the other hand, they're very hard to miss because they are very large. We do have another one that is quite common that does have hair, like very thick hair on the thorax, but the abdomen is going to be relatively bare of hairs. And with carpenter bees, they are going to create their nursery areas in wood. And it's usually not sound wood. It's usually wood that has been, or it's rotting or kind of breaking down. And then on the right-hand side, we have a classic that is a leafcutter bee. They carry pollen, and also the mason bees do as well. They carry pollen on their abdomens. So they have hairs that are on their abdomens that are going to be able to hold on that pollen. And those are going to be cavity nesters. So any kind of, you know, elongated tube-like structure, or pithy stemmed plants or hollow stemmed plants, that is what they're aiming for to raise their offspring. So what you can do to help encourage not just pollinators, but all insects in your landscape is planting things and making sure that you have layers in the landscape. So different heights of things, ground covers, but also grasses, shrubs, you know, small trees. You want all sorts of different layers so you have windbreaks and shelter for those insects. You also want to make sure that you aren't making everything pristine. My yard is a perfect example of that because I don't clean everything up. I leave a little mess. I have the twigs. I have, you know, various, like if the grass dies, it just, there's bare soil out there. Bees will find it or something. So having those areas is going to be very important. Hold on a minute. There's somebody at the front door. The other thing that you can provide is going to be overwintering areas for insects. And this could be fallen leaves. So when those leaves fall off the tree, leave them on the ground because that's going to be great habitat for the insects. If you have hollow stemmed or pithy stemmed plants, leave those plants. That's what you see in that upper left-hand picture there. Those insects can possibly be overwintering in that space. And so you can leave those in place. I just now, like last weekend, I just started pruning back all of the dead stuff. And I haven't even gotten to everything because, you know, it'll be fine. You can also create artificial habitats like you see on the right-hand picture. That is just found items around the house, and you can put that on the ground. You can put it in a tree. You can hang it on a fence. Do however fancy or unfancy you want. And then you can also do a log and create a habitat that way. That is a partially buried log that I am allowing to just decay over time and have insects come in and use that as a habitat. If you are going to do something like that, I would recommend that you do that away from your structure. Mine does have termites in it, which I was expecting at some point. So just make sure that we do have native termites. So just be aware and place that away from the home. You can also, if you want to go a step above, provide nesting materials. I try to leave a area that has mud. This could be around an AC condensate line. If you don't have a leaky sprinkler thing, I mean, usually we're telling you not to do that, but if you want mud daubers in your landscape, providing them with mud is going to be important. If you want something that makes a paper-like nest, whether that's paper wasps or honey wasps or something like that, providing them with some wood that they can use to chew on and make that nest is going to be important. And then, of course, on the right, if you see that type of damage, that is from leafcutter bees. And so if you see that, you should be super excited that you have them in the landscape. Providing safe water sources is huge. Insects are small, so if you're providing large areas of water, they can drown in that. So try to make it so those insects can access that water safely by either putting large rocks in there or plants in ponds. There's some special things that are on the bottom. On the left, we have bee cups. They are very small. You can make designs. The middle, Vicky, who I know you're on here, she designed this. That was using Quickcrete, a dripper that's hooked up to the irrigation system, and then like a 5-gallon bucket. And it just constantly drips out some water for the insects. And then on the right-hand side, that is called the Bee Oasis. And that, again, you just fill up the jar and it just kind of leaches water out in small amounts so those insects can get to it safely. And then I think everybody has my contact information, but if you don't, here I am.
Awesome. Wizzy, that was incredible. I always learn so much when I listen to you or see you out in the field. We have time for just a few questions and then we'll move along to Craig. We will go over the hour mark that I mentioned earlier, but that's okay. We're not slowing y'all down too
Sorry.
today. No. I was not going to stop you. I was learning and excited about things. A few questions that came in, but I'm only going to ask 2 if you don't mind. One, Kristen is curious about which native plants pair for lightning bugs. She's been seeing them in her backyard the last few nights.
Ooh. Well, if you want the beetles to come in for the pollen, it's going to be more of a white colored flower. I'd probably say like white yarrow would be a good one for them to be on, or maybe like a Queen Anne's lace, because that's giving them a large platform to sit on, but it's also accessible for them. And with them, they like moist habitats, and so kind of lots of vegetation and not a lot of light. So keep your porch lights off at night.
Nice.
And I'll put my contact information in the chat box when Craig is talking, so y'all can have that.
And then one early question that Richard had when you were talking about flies. You said that most flies have 2 wings. Do
Yes.
the others have 4 wings or no wings?
No, there's a family of flies, the Hippoboscidae. They are parasites. They're on cattle, and those ones don't have any wings.
Wow. Oh, interesting. Say the name of them again.
Hippoboscidae.
Hippoboscidae. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that picture up.
They're like I want to say common name Keds.
Okay, I'll look that one up. Wonderful, thank you. If there's more questions for Wizzy, it sounds like she's going to stick around for a little while.
Yeah, I'll go through chat.
Perfect. And then Hannah, what are we doing next?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Rizzy. That was a great presentation. We're gonna now introduce Craig. If you'll dive into what you have prepared for us, I'm super excited. So,
All righty, here. Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm probably going to take more than 10 minutes, just so you all know.
We want you to. We
Okay.
want to hear all of it.
Okay. All righty. So, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to visit with you all tonight. It's nice to see a lot of names I'm familiar with out there. So we're gonna, what I'm gonna do is try to cover several different things, more specific to the grant, but I'm also gonna talk about some of the native plants that you might consider. And of course, remember, Texas is a huge state. So what I talk about may not be completely appropriate if you're in El Paso, for example, or even down in Houston, or maybe in the Valley or up in the Panhandle. But I've tried to make it generic enough to kind of give you an overall bit of idea about how to go about thinking about your project. And hopefully you already are thinking about that. But to give you some, just to put some things in your head to kind of help that process. So again, I think like what I did, what Wizzy did, and what a wonderful presentation Wizzy gave, as she always does, to try to make sure we leave the questions to the end, and then we'll try to get those answered best we can. All right, so to begin with, we'll just jump right into it. So I wanted to start out by just talking about some recent research that just came out about pollinators in general. And we're going to mostly focus, she talked about the pollinators, but I want to kind of put this in the context of why this grant program is out there trying to create pollinator gardens out there. In a recent research, a bit of research that just came out that looked at butterfly surveys from multiple sources across the country, the United States, between the year 2000 and the year 2020, found that back in 2000, there would be, for every 5 butterflies, today there's only 4 of those. So that's somewhere at about a 20, what is that, about 20% decline in butterfly numbers across the United States. And of all of those butterflies, and we've got a great diversity of them, 107 species declined by more than 50%, 22 species declined by more than 90%. Which is pretty dramatic for all of them. The good news is, however, some did have increases over part of their range, some of them across their entire range, but not very many. The general trend that we want to see is either even levels or increasing, hopefully over time. And so that kind of raises the flag that if butterflies are having trouble, and a lot of people love butterflies and are attracted to butterflies and do things for butterflies, if the favorites of all these pollinators are declining, then what's going on with the other ones? And across Europe, there's been a lot of research over the last several years showing that declines in pollinator populations, bees and hoverflies and things like that, some of those are pretty dramatic declines with habitat change and all of the things that go on. And speaking of which, the challenges faced by pollinators include, of course, just out and out habitat loss, kind of the reason for lots of species going downhill. And then even the fragmentation of habitat, continued and persistent use of pesticides, and the new pesticides that keep coming out are more virulent, kill more things, particularly the systemics that are now being put into a lot of our plants that we find in greenhouses. Not so much native plants, but your non-native plants. And there's a lot of evidence that once that systemic pesticide gets into the nectar and the pollen, it's essentially killing the pollinators that you're trying to attract. So I always encourage people, when you're buying plants, whether they're native or not, I would be asking the question, are these plants being raised with systemic pesticides? And if they are, stay away from them. You're not helping pollinators at all by accidentally buying the wrong plants. Climate change, of course, is blamed for lots of things these days. One of the things that happens with pollinators and the flowers that they're eating, some of them, especially if they're specialists, the timing of when those pollinators emerge into adulthood to when the flowers that they are seeking pollen or nectar from, there could be a mismatch in timing. A good example, it's not specific pollination, but we're starting to see a little bit in this part of Texas. Each year, it seems like there's becoming a bigger mismatch between the spring arrival of monarchs and the emergence of milkweeds in some parts of the state. And part of that is just late winter storms, things like that. But generally, you're starting to see that a little bit more. And then in the fall, what I've noticed over the last 6 to 7 years is that two of the plants that monarchs depend on greatly as they migrate through Texas in the fall, frostweed and cowpen daisy, at least in my experiences of observing the natural world at that time of the year, a lot of the frostweeds that I see are actually done flowering before the monarchs ever arrive. And we know that nectar producing plants in the fall are essential to the successful migration of the monarchs. So those kinds of things, time will tell how that all shakes out, but those are things we certainly should at least be aware of and understand a little bit. And then also the other thing that I think is something that's often overlooked when it comes to pollinators is just a lack of understanding or interest or knowledge from the general public. I've spent most of my career talking to people who are already into nature, but the vast majority of people that are surrounding me are not necessarily as enthusiastic as my audiences or myself. And it's those folks that we need to strive to broaden the umbrella, if you will, to bring more of those folks under that umbrella and not turn them into nature nuts or anything like that necessarily, but they need to have a better understanding that when they go to the grocery store and they buy some of those vegetables and they buy those fruits, it isn't magic makes it happen. It's the pollinators that are making it happen, whether it's honeybees or whether it's native pollinators. We don't need to get in an argument about that. But just the fact that people take it for granted, I think a lot of people do. We have a big job to do, and this project that HEB is helping support, and the efforts that you're making to make this happen are critical. And that's why in this grant they've got this pollinator garden part, and they've also got the education component. And we're going to talk about both of those tonight here in the next several minutes. So I just want to bring that kind of reality home to you. And of course, the overall goal for this grant funding is to generate measurable positive impact on native pollinators and their habitats across all of the state of Texas, while improving the communities in which HEB employees and customers live, work, and recreate. The purposes of this grant are to provide, and notice I said new additional pollinator spaces across Texas. The emphasis is on providing new acres. They want as big an impact on the ground as possible. So that, and I met with Michelle today, just so that you know, to talk about all of this with her a little bit. And the reason I want to emphasize that is if you already have a pollinator garden and you've already put plants in there and you decide to write a grant that is just adding more plants to it without increasing the size of it, that particular grant proposal, all of them will be considered, but that may not score as highly as one where you say, hey, we're going to add an extra 100 square feet or 200 square feet or whatever it is, or an acre or whatever it is. We want additional acres on the ground to really be supporting additional pollinators on the landscape. The other significant part of this is trying to provide outreach programs focused on native pollinators and pollinating habitat and in the conservation of all of that together. So we're going to talk about that here in just a moment, about that educational component. Again, things to remember, just to refresh your brain. Some of it's already been talked about tonight, so I apologize for repeating it, but the funding is variable up to $4,000 for individual projects. One of the big things that has popped up and we all need to be considering, if your area has severe watering restrictions, how do you address that? You're going to need to look at a lot of these projects will be on public land. You're going to need to look at your partner, the person that the organization that owns that property, and see if you can get them to put some skin into the game, as it were, asking, for example, if you just write a grant and ask only for water catchment, that's not really improving acres of habitat. Is it keeping some of those acres maybe alive? You could argue that, but you would have to make sure, again, don't make that the sole reason you're applying for that grant. It may not score against those other grant applications that have added additional ground space to the pollination game. If you have an existing area, I've already mentioned it, but make sure you're looking, how do you expand the footprint, not just enhance the existing footprint. We want more habitat. And then again, another big consideration for the grant proposal is, what is your long-term maintenance? If you haven't thought about that, especially with water restrictions and especially with the weather that is so inconsistent here in Texas so much of the time now, you need to be able to spell that out and let folks know that are reviewing the grants that of what you're going to do to make sure that this thing is successful, how you're going to maintain it, how you're going to make it work down the road. So provide as many details as you can. And of course, things change, people change, things go away, that kind of stuff, but try to do the best that you can on that. And then also make sure that in your grant application that you select either the education component or the habitat component to kind of help divide those out when the grants are being considered. And hopefully, Hannah, I haven't said anything that's too outlandish.
No, you're great.
Okay, so in terms of education considerations, some things to think about. I'm going to touch on this tonight. I've spent most of my life doing interpretation of various kinds, so hopefully I'm speaking from a little bit of experience and common sense as much as anything. First of all, you should strive, if you're going to do education outreach type activities, strive to reach as many people as possible and be realistic about it. Don't say, hey, we're going to put something out and we're going to have 10,000 people reach it, in your community only has 3,000 people in it. Be realistic with those numbers, and also be realistic of what you can actually accomplish with the volunteer core that you have that's surrounding you and is interested in doing that. The other thing that and some of you may be aghast at what that second one says, because I've been teaching children for decades, but one of my arguments over the last many years has been that while it's very important to educate our youth about the environment and the reasons to protect it and the value of it and all of the rest that is contained, the fact of the matter is, and I heard this straight out of the mouth of Doug Tallamy, so if you don't want to believe Craig Hensley, go ahead and believe Doug Tallamy, that if we don't educate and engage the adults who are the decision makers today and for the next 10 to 15 years, by the time the children grow up and become the decision makers, it may already be too late. So when you're thinking about education components, think about that. You've got to think about who are the decision makers today, and they're the people that are determining whether a park is going to be developed or a park is going to be turned into some kind of development or dug up for oil or whatever it is. Doesn't matter what it is. It's the adults that make the decisions today. We cannot put all of the emphasis and the hope on the children. We can educate the children, but we better be educating the adults and their the kids' parents, because then the kids, like I say, it may be too late. I waited for 40 some years teaching, thinking I was going to make a giant difference in the world because there's going to be a generation or two come up and they're all going to be environmentally whatever. Well, that hadn't worked out that great, frankly. So that's why I want to emphasize, make sure you address the adults that are in charge of what's happening today. Things to do also, if you're doing signage, there's all kinds of different signs, as you all know. There's the little metal ones, there's wooden stakes, there's everything. But one of the things that I notice a lot more people are doing is they're using those QR codes. Maybe they have the name of the plant. Emphasize, and here's where I'm going to kind of go this way and this way. Again, there are the common names and there are scientific names, right? The scientific names are the actual name of the plant. The common names can be local or regional, all of that. You can prove that by using iNaturalist or just living in your area and moving 200 miles one way or the other and finding out that somebody else calls that plant something else that you never heard of. So using those QR codes, with links to NIPSOT's wonderful website or the LBJ Wildflower Center's wonderful website on plant identification and natural history is super important, super valuable. You don't have to go to the expense of putting a bunch of words on a sign. So take advantage of that. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to use the common name for your local area, because that's who you're targeting in your particular area. So keep that in mind. The scientific name, if you want to throw that up there, that's fine. But the reality is most people in general public have no knowledge of anything Latin names. Not that we shouldn't educate them, but don't use that as the emphasis of what the name of that organism is. If you're using interpretive panels or developing interpretive panels, which I'm a big fan of, make sure that you use experts in your area to help you create those so that you get the best product, the longest lasting product. There are a lot of beautiful interpretive panels I'm sure you've seen as you've wandered national parks or state parks or wherever, that are faded and old and you're peeling and you can't read them. There are others that you can make that are, and the state parks are doing this now. They've got a process that's pretty economical, and if it starts to fade, it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to replace that sign. So use your state park interpreters or resource specialists, those kind of folks, if you have them around you, to lean on for expert help in designing or creating, finding the right materials for your interpretive panels, because the weather does have a dramatic impact on those. And if they're not made well, they may only last 2 or 3 or 4 years before they are basically useless. And why do that if you don't have to? If you're designing some kind of handout, consider that most of when I used to give handouts at my public programs, when I worked at Guadalupe River State Park or any other nature center I happened to work at, most of them ended up in the trash or on the ground or on the trail. So keep that in mind. Make it something that people are going to go, I want to keep a hold of this. So it may be a little fold out brochure that has some of the common pollinators that they can encounter if they walk through that particular garden area. It may be the names of and pictures of some of the wildflowers, something that they're going to find value in. And if that means they got to make a donation of $1 or $2, then so be it. That will also enhance the likelihood that that little brochure may be held onto. If you're designing curriculum for children, how can it be used to also engage the parents? A lot of times, as you all know, if you've led nature experiences for children, the parents are in the background looking at their cell phones, or they're talking about what bar they're going to hang out on the weekend or what football game they're going to watch on Saturday or Sunday. Get them to be engaged with the children, because that's how you can then reach that adult group. It shouldn't just be the children, it should be the children with the adults. And when they engage each other, more learning happens, more memories happen, and things turn out much better down the road. And then also, obviously, hopefully you all know this, use a hands-on approach with your education program development. So when you write your grant, if you're going to do a program development, don't make it, and I'm not putting this down, but don't make it just a coloring book. What other things are you doing with that coloring book? Or what other things are you doing that is an activity-based thing? Is that part of it? Is that something they take home with them? But and I know Hays County, I'll call them out. They've done amazing things with environmental education. So if you know there's a chapter, and I just gave you a hint for one, if you know there's chapters out there, and maybe it's yours, doing tremendous things with hands-on education, reach out to them, share your ideas. We're all one big family here, or certainly we should be in the master naturalist world. So let's get away from the education stuff and get into the critter stuff and the plant stuff. So there's a lot of ways to talk about pollination, and I want to remind you all that obviously pollination is very important. You've all learned about a wide variety of the pollinators that are here in Texas that you can enjoy. What I want to do, instead of talking to you about what pollination is, I'm going to show you 4 short videos of what pollination actually is when you're out there observing in the natural world. Okay, the first one is one some of you may have seen if you've ever seen me give a presentation on this kind of thing before. It's going to be a queen bumblebee, a Sonoran bumblebee that's emerged in the spring and is feeding on a plant called marble seed or false gromwell. If you're looking for a plant and you live in the Edwards Plateau, and I'd have to go see what the state range of this plant is, this is a plant to consider in a habitat planting for pollinators, and that's because it's spectacular. I could go on for 15 minutes, but I'm not gonna. So what I want you to notice is this is a flower that hangs upside down, and the opening of the flower is actually closed. So the pollinator has to be big enough or heavy enough to be able to push open the flower, stick its proboscis all the way to the bottom of the flower, which is of course up in the air, drink the nectar, and then as it's moving around inside that flower, it comes in contact with the stamens, which are mounted on the inside of each of the petals. And as it comes back out of the flower, it starts to drag some of the pollen out. The other thing I want you to notice is that there's a long skinny thing sticking out of the flower. That would be the stigma and the style of the pistil of the flower. And there's two basic ways for most plants to get pollinated. One is wind, one is animal. I want you to watch what happens in this video and see what if you notice both. And so it's just kind of fun to see. So let's see if we can make it work. So give it a few seconds here. Let me see if I can I speed it along? Let me speed it along. Here we go. You hear the buzzing of it. Maybe you can't hear the buzzing of it, but trust me when I say it's loud buzzing. And so you notice this bee is hanging upside down. It's huge because it's the queen, just emerged from the winter. Only the queens of the bumblebees survive the winter, so that she has to start an entire new colony. Oh, there we go. Maybe it'll start working up again a little bit. That's better. Okay, so she's hanging upside down. Oh, did you see it? Keep watching. First of all, there's pollen falling on her belly. So every time she moves from a new plant to one plant to another, she's spreading pollen by it contacting the sticky stigmas that are perched outside the flower. Now here's where it really gets good. So her belly, which is black, is actually turning yellow now with all that pollen. Keep watching. There it goes. See how it's just spilling out? There it goes. There's a whole bunch through the air. So here's a plant that has figured out how to be pollinated in two different manners. And I've seen this plant be pollinated or visited by hummingbirds, by the bumblebees, by white-winged sphinx moths, white-lined sphinx moths. All kinds of things visit this flower in the spring. By the way, it is again false cromwell or marble seed. It is a wonderful native plant that grows in partial shade and sun. And I've got some in my yard. It does spread, as do most native plants when you put them in there without any controls around them. But it's a spectacular example of pollination. I'm going to do this again. Let's get to the next one. Okay, now I want you to watch the one on the left first, and then we'll do the one on the right. Just watch the behavior. So this is a mason bee. It collects its pollen on its belly, on the hairs of its belly, and it's using its legs to scoop through the Texas thistle flowers, scooping the pollen off of the stamens and stigmas and putting it right to its belly. So that's how it's gathering nectar, or pollen. Completely different way of doing it. All right, let's go. Let's stop this one. And let's go to this one. Now this is a little itty bitty bee. This is the same kind of flower. Notice how tiny this bloody thing is. There's two of them there. They are literally crawling, so small they can crawl on the one set of stamens from one flower of that thistle. And they are literally plucking off individual pollen grains and stuffing them onto their legs one at a time. I just find that that is pollination. So when we think about pollination, it's not always the big bumblebee, it's not always the big butterfly. For most of it, it is these tiny little bees that are between 3 and 7 millimeters long doing the bulk of the work of pollination out in the natural landscape. All right, let's go to this one. And then finally, we've got a crooked-legged bee of some species. It is a specialist pollinator. It really loves pollinating on members of the morning glory family. So watch what it does. Right now, there's actually two in there, and a third one came by. One of them's going to leave because it's too crowded, apparently. And there it goes. Now watch what this bee does. It actually uses its legs to spread out against the inside of the tube of the morning glory. And you can see all the pollen on its feet. So that's why they call them crooked-legged bees. I could watch these guys forage all day long, all day long. This is Alamo vine, by the way. Wonderful vine. Does spread, but it's a wonderful vine for these bees in particular. All right, so that, I'm not going to talk any more about specific insects because that was already covered. I'm going to talk and introduce you to birds and mammals, and then we're going to start talking about some of the flowers. And I know it. I know that it's already 7:13, so I will go as quickly as possible. So first of all, there are bird pollinators. In fact, 10% of birds globally are thought to be effective pollinators. So it's not just hummingbirds, but in the United States, it is just hummingbirds, with some occasional exceptions, including orioles. Why do we have oriole feeders? Because they come and drink nectar. Well, if they drink nectar out of a plastic dish, they're probably going to be drinking nectar out of the individual flowers and spreading some pollen using on their beaks and their foreheads, like you see in this picture of this black-chinned hummingbird. So 19 species in Texas. Our most common where I live here in Bernie is the black-chinned, and then in migration, the ruby-throated. If you live in West Texas, you got a lot more diversity. If you live in South Texas, got more diversity. If you live in the Panhandle, you probably got what I got. Or Dallas, you probably got what I got. Houston, you probably have more diversity as well. But they are important pollinators. They, of course, have that long tongue with the long beak, so they can get down into long tubed flowers, even though they'll feed on a wide variety of flowers. Trust me when I say that. They don't only feed on red flowers, just as you see here, them feeding on this purple Texas thistle, which has lavender or purple flowers. They feed on flowers of varying lengths, as I mentioned. They'll even feed on frostweed. So that's a very shallow flower by comparison to some of the others. And of course, pollen is accumulated mostly on the forehead and on the bill. So as they move from flower to flower, that's how they help spread that pollen. So they can be very important pollinators in our world. And then of course, there are bats. There are approximately 232 species worldwide that feed on nectar. However, in Texas, we have two primarily, and those are the Mexican long-tongued and the long-nosed bats. They forage on flowers and they fly up to them and they hover over the flowers. A lot of the other pollinating bats in other parts of the world actually land on the flower and feed that way. Their adaptations include having a long snout, having little bumps on their nose that also help to get pollen. And of course, that fuzzy muzzle picks up a lot of pollen as they move around. And I'm sure no one in this audience ever has drank anything with tequila in it, but just in case you didn't know this, they feed on agave flowers, which of course provides a tequila for those people that actually drink alcohol. I don't know who that would be. We recently just, I shouldn't say we, some researchers doing research on bats, catching them in nets out west in West Texas, recently discovered within the last few years that pallid bats, which are notorious for feeding on things like scorpions and red-headed centipedes, among other things, actually also feed on the pollen or the nectar of lechuguilla flowers. And lechuguilla is the classic plant of the Chihuahuan Desert. It is a type of agave, but they have those long flower stalks. And we've just recently discovered that, which is pretty exciting to know that it's not just the specialist, but sometimes even a predatory bat might take advantage of that nectar. And of course, they have hairy bodies and they got a big size. They fly long distance, so they can handle a lot of pollen, move it long distances. The only time that can be kind of hurt the genetic material is if you've got a territorial male who's staying within a very small area looking for a female, and he may be not passing enough genetic material around, at least for that period of time when they're in the mating season. But generally, those are pretty good, but you're only going to find those for the most part in the Big Bend region, way down in Big Bend National Park in that area. Although there have been individuals that have been found in I think one of the two species in the El Paso area, a couple up in the records in the Edwards Plateau, and maybe even one of them up in the Panhandle part of Texas as well. So they have wings, they fly. So a couple of things I want you to remember, and this is really important. Diversity begets diversity. When you're putting together your plan with your plants and your garden area, think about diversity. And I'm not just talking about diversity in terms of the number of plants or the number of species of plants. It's a lot more to it than that. And I want to talk about that briefly before we get into some specific examples and why those specific examples might be good candidates for you to consider, or something similar in your area. First of all, variation is an important component of maximizing pollinator diversity. That means a lot of different things to whoever you're talking about. First of all, floral density. One of the things that always drove me nuts when we have these native plant sales, somebody comes out and goes, I'll buy one of these, and I'll buy one of these, and I'll buy one of these. Well, that doesn't do much good for floral density, or frankly, it may help the species richness a little bit. But if you've only got one of a given plant, if pollinators do visit and will, they have nowhere to take it if there's none others around in the area. So when you're thinking about your planting, what you're going to do in terms of numbers and things like that for both species richness, the number of species, and the density, planting them in patches. I'm notorious, talk to my wife, for just putting one over here and over here and over here and over here. I'm learning, I'm still educating myself. But having patches of that flower so the bees and the other pollinators aren't traveling as far to get to a patch. If you give it long enough time, things will spread and they'll kind of fill in and it'll work out pretty good. So one of the things I like to tell people is, as you're planning, go out and look in nature, look at how things happen in nature, and follow that design. It's out there, it's working. So if it's working out there, why can't we apply it to those little garden patches that we put together? So keep that in mind. Floral density, species richness. The other thing to keep in mind, and there's been some amazing research recently. I've got this wonderful research paper that I've already read 4 times, trying to understand all the computations in it, but that's why I go to the discussion to find out what really happened. But it turns out that having a diversity of flowers with shallow floral tubes maximizes the diversity of pollinators. And so if you think about floral tube, you want to compare that to proboscis length of the insect, their tongue. So if they have a long tongue, they can get into a long flower, right? But many pollinators, and remember, a lot of them are 3 to 7 millimeters long, or maybe even over a quarter of an inch, and now I'm going from metric to English scale, or a half an inch. Their tongues are only so long for the most part. Exceptions would be butterflies. We're talking bees here. We're talking wasps because they don't really have a tongue. They got jaws. So the shorter the flower, the wider the variety of species that can feed on the nectar in that flower. And there's a lot of research that shows if the flower is this long, the tongue will be just slightly longer than the tube. So bees, insects with long floral tube or long proboscis can nectar on deep flower ones and shallow flower ones. And because the majority of them have short tongues, think about that in your selection of plants. That can be really critical to maximizing your pollinator diversity. So what kind of plants are out there? Gobs of them, obviously. Obviously, I could spend the rest of the night talking about them. I'm going to try not to. But one of my, and this is a personal favorite, but it's based on observing the natural world for years and years, and actually sitting down in front of the flower and going, okay, who's coming? Who's coming to this flower? And actually then documenting who's coming to that flower. And not all flowers are equal when it comes to pollinators and pollinator diversity on that species. Keep that in mind. That's why making these observations can be important for your decision making. But composites are ideal for pollinators because instead of a flower, they can have hundreds of flowers, potentially. Think dandelion. I know it's not native, but think of that. But you can think of this right here, this pincushion daisy. Look at all the flowers, and they're not even all open yet. Look at all the flowers here that an individual bee can visit. By the way, they smell delicious. Or you can have a composite that's just ray flowers, no disc flowers, just ray flowers, fewer flowers. But if you look at the flower, copious amounts of pollen out there. These are visited by long-tongued things like pipevine swallowtails, bumblebees love this flower. This is skeleton plant. And then you have a lot of the normal, more typical composites that have both ray flowers and disc flowers. The ray flowers, by the way, for a lot of these plants are actually more to attract than they are to produce seeds. There are exceptions, but the good news about these plants is that they can accept both long-tongued and short-tongued pollinators. Another thistle, and I know you're going, oh my God, it's thistle. Why would we ever do this? This is Texas thistle. It's native. It has, I've never sat down and tried to count all the flowers, but I've heard that bull thistle, the big non-native one, invasive one, can have upwards of 3,000 flowers in one head. Even if this one only has 500, and I suspect there's more than that, that's a lot of potential nectar and pollen for pollinators. This one, because of the shape and design of the flower, it needs somebody with a fairly long tongue. So a lot of large butterflies with long, unraveling proboscis, they are going to be able to take advantage of these thistle flowers. And you saw how earlier how the tiny bees take advantage of it. They may not benefit from the nectar, but they sure can gather a lot of pollen on that. So again, I'm not saying go plant a ton of this, but if you have it, take advantage of it. By the way, I planted some in my yard. They have surprisingly enough not spread like I thought they would. They really haven't. Then, of course, you have flowers for long-tongued pollinators. I'm trying to connect the pollinators with the shape of the flower. And so these have the exserted pistils and stamens and a long tongue. So for example, we just take columbine here, an insect that's going to go in and get the pollen or the nectar, which is at the end of this little spur right here. They got to have a pretty long tongue or be a big insect to push through there. So hummingbirds love this. You will see long-tongued bumblebees sometimes nectar in here. Long-tongued moths will sometimes use this. But a lot of bees cheat. If they don't have a long enough tongue and they can't crawl in all the way in here because it gets narrow, they will actually try to chew a hole in here. But just to let you know a little bit of nature trivia, those tips have chemicals in them that the plants have evolved over time that apparently taste bad to some of those robbers, and thus they stay away from robbing it all the time. But this one right here, which is Ocotillo, of course, has a longish tube, flower tube. This flower, if you live in West Texas, and I know Ocotillo has become a very popular plant, I do not encourage you, and you should not be digging it out of state parks or WMAs or anything like that. It is being ravaged from some of the landscapes out there, and it's becoming more of a concern about its future. But this plant is super important to those hummingbirds that migrate into West Texas. So the timing of when they flower and the timing of those hummingbirds' arrival is vital to both groups of organisms. But again, a different way to present the flowers, so something to think about. So here are some flowers that have nectar guides here. They have landing platforms. They're kind of inviting the pollinator in. Those landing pads give them a place to land, and then they can push down in here. If they have a long tongue, then they can reach all the way down to the nectar, which is down here. If they're small enough, they can just crawl all the way down in there. But there's also hairs and other things in here to try to prevent the small ones from small pollinators from stealing the nectar without getting any pollen on them, because a lot of these have their pollen, their stamens and their pistils at the top of the open tube. And so when a large bee lands here and walks down in there, these stamens will actually tap the bee on the back and drop some pollen. And when the pistil is ready for receiving pollen on another flower, it too will tap the back of the bee that's crawling into there. So it can be very valuable. Some of these actually, the stamens are on a hinge, an actual two-part hinge. So imagine a hinge like this, and when the flower is moved, this part moves down on the hinge. It's like a hinge on a door almost. I never believed that until I looked at it inside a flower under a microscope, and they're really hinged. Pretty cool. So again, a different style flower for different style bees and other pollinators. And if you have penstemons here in your garden, most of them are blooming in the spring. Really good for bumblebees and some of the larger bees, the carpenter bees and some of the other larger bees that come out first in the spring when it's just the queens. It's a great time to try to get them to visit those kind of flowers. Now think about consideration of plants that are hosts to caterpillars. This is another thing you should be thinking about when you're putting that plant list together. I'll show you a couple of references that are fantastic for Texas at the end of the presentation. Think about that. You know, you have some species of pollinators, for example, the sleepy orange, which prefers to lay its eggs only on the plants of sennas. So they're more of a specialist in terms of reaching them for egg laying. If you're a gray hair streak, you're not very picky. You're going to find wherever it looks good, you're going to throw an egg down there. And so it can be a wide variety of things. Things like tiger swallowtails would be another example. They'll lay their eggs on any kind of tree out there, whereas the giant swallowtail and the two-tailed swallowtail are very specific about which plants they choose. Again, do the research. Who do you want to attract? How do you best try to attract them? All right, then you've got those plants that serve everybody. I mean, everybody and everything. So one of the best ones, in this part of the state, I am a true believer in shrubby boneset. Yes, it blooms late in the summer. It's a beautiful woody shrub. When it starts blooming, it blooms for a month and a half or more sometimes, depending on where you are and what the weather's doing. And every pollinator that is out there flocks to these flowers. I can literally sit in front of my shrubby boneset with a camera and photograph different pollinators for up to 3 hours. They are they just flood to this thing. So if you're trying to maximize your diversity of fall pollinators, you cannot go wrong with shrubby boneset if it grows, or a similar plant in this particular genus. So down in the valley, it could be Crucita. That could be the one there. Up north, it could be another member of this group of plants. They're all Joe Pieweed would be a great example if it grows in North Texas. I think it does, but I'd have to check. But those kinds of plants are great for everything. So look for plants that aren't only just for a few species. Another one, and some people might go, oh my God, this thing is a weed. It is an annual. It does get weedy, but by golly, when it's blooming, and it starts blooming in April, May, and goes all the way until the coldest weather, it will attract, again, every different kind of pollinator. I've highlighted butterflies here, but trust me, bees, wasps, everybody, beetles, flies, they all come to this flower. And it's prolific. So it's a wonderful plant to consider, particularly when you're starting a project from scratch and you want to have some immediate success. These are the kind of plants, these annuals that are showy and produce flowers, and they'll work themselves out of the system as your garden grows. I've had this in my garden now for coming into my 6th year at my home garden. I have far less Cowpendaisy than I want now because other things have taken over. They're a plant of disturbance, so keep that in mind. That just because you have some doesn't mean they're always going to be there in the same numbers. Now let's talk about a few woody plants, because when you're planting this garden, again, a woody plant provides instant, especially if you're using a lot of seeds or using seedlings, having a few woody plants that produce flowers is going to be very valuable. It's also going to have an immediate impact. People are going to come to it and go, oh, I see what they're doing here. If it's only just bare ground with a bunch of little seedlings like this or just seeds, people are going to go, what in the world are they wasting this space for? So keep that in mind. And two of the best ones, they both grow here in Texas. The agarita, and some people would go, why would we plant agarita? If you already have it in your area, keep it. That can be one of the most important flowers in the early spring before our typical wildflowers have emerged from the ground. All the pollinators love that in the spring. Mexican plum is the other one. You cannot go wrong with Mexican plum in the spring if it grows in your area. So again, look for a native spring flowering plant. And just to show you what happens, check that out. This is one morning after that big snowstorm back in 2020 or 2021, whenever it happened, Snowmageddon. All of the agarita flowers were frozen off. Somehow the plum tree flowers survived in about a 2-hour period. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the pollinators that I photographed visiting one. I think there were actually 2 of these Mexican plums blooming. So again, incredibly important. Yes, it's short term. It's only for a week or 2, but it's a great start to kick off your spring. And it's showy and beautiful, and it'll provide some shade in the hot days of summer once it gets to size. Another plant, seasonality. We're talking spring. This is another tree that exists in a lot of parts of Texas. Some people may not like it, but it is visited by a lot of pollinators in the early spring when those tiny little flowers come out. Notice this monarch. It flew up behind me, and I turned around, and here it was nectaring on a flower that is not nearly as long as its proboscis. And then another day we saw all of these olive hair streaks all over the flowers. So even a plant like this in the early spring, when there's not a lot of diversity out there yet, these plants can be extremely valuable. So again, consider those woody plants. And then sometimes you'll have these that everybody likes because they got the beautiful pink flowers. Again, it's seasonality. Again, it's springtime, not long lasting. But if you are a Henry's elfin, if you're in the range of the Henry's elfin, This is the only time of the year that you actually lay your eggs. They come out, they emerge in the early spring when the flowers start blooming on the Mexican buckeye and the Texas redbud, or if in East Texas, the regular redbud. Um, these are the plants they lay their eggs on. And this year I planted Mexican buckeyes and Texas redbuds just to show you that if you plant it, they will come. I found my first Henry's elephant in my yard ever this spring. And a few weeks later, I found one of its caterpillars crawling on the stems. And here's a great bit of nature trivia for you. The Texas redbud or the Henry's elephant, if it's feeding on the flowers, the caterpillar is pink. And if it's feeding on the leaves, the caterpillar is, you guessed it, green. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, and then here we go. So one of the things I always emphasize is don't hesitate to use the plants that are already there. And when I'm talking about things like that, crow poison grows everywhere. Wild garlic seems to grow everywhere. Even pincushion daisy can be very commonplace in roadside ditches and disturbed places. Take advantage of those plants because as those photographs show, they're very valuable in early season plants. When you don't have a lot of your big stuff blooming, look at the seasonality of the species you're putting in your garden. Take advantage of these little guys that are all over the landscape. And another one, a larger plant that has become my single most favorite plant in my native gardens is the Texas prairie parsley. Nobody talks about it. It has a big taproot. It's a perennial, beautiful plant, produces hundreds of flowers per plant. And every small wasp, bee, fly that is out from the time it begins blooming in late March all the way into May is visiting these flowers because they're very short. So you've got short tongues, taking advantage of short tubed flowers, and it is prolific for producing diversity and in your garden. So again, here's another good part of the parsley family, and theoretically, it's a host plant for the black swallowtail. Keep that in mind too. So again, the diversity you can create by being strategic in your seasonality of the plants you're choosing and things can be tremendous. And then of course there's the seasonality of the antelope horns, which comes up in the spring, but we always think of them as an important plant for the monarch, which it is because the monarch's coming out of Mexico. They got to have a plant to lay their eggs on. Where I live, this is the most common used plant by monarchs. If you live in East Texas, it might be the green milkweed. If you live farther west, it might be the zyzotes. If you live in North Texas, it may be another type. If monarchs come through there, like what is that big leaf? That huge leaf. Oh my gosh, it's a wonder. Right now I can't remember the name, but it's a wonderful milkweed. But it comes up later, so I don't know if it gets used that much. But here's the second thing. Not only is this a great plant for monarchs and queens, it's a great plant for pollinators. I have had times when I've counted over 20 small butterflies nectaring on the same flower head of this particular species. And here you have two different species of butterflies and a honeybee, and gosh knows what else is in there if we really took the time to look. So here's one pulling double duty. Again, how many times can we get double duty out of our plants? Another great example of double duty is this guy, Zexminia. It's blooming now here where I live, and it will bloom all the way through fall. It gets ravaged by the bordered patch butterfly, but then the leaves grow back, it reflowers, and it's doing great, and another generation of bordered patches are raised on it. So again, keep in mind, not only seasonality, this one long flowering period, but then multiple use by other critters as well. And then again, persistence of bloom and seasonality. Once frog fruit starts blooming, it's blooming all through the year. It makes a great ground cover. It's visited by lots of smaller pollinators. Mealy blue sage, if you put a gun to my head, the only wildflower to have, if I could only choose one, it would be mealy blue sage because it's blooming now. It'll be done blooming for a while, then it'll bloom again, and then it'll bloom again, and it'll bloom again, and everything from bumblebees to butterflies to small bees to flies to wasps, they all visit mealy blue sage, and it's a beautiful plant. So keep that in mind. Seasonality, here we have one of the biggest challenges we have here in large parts of Texas is in August and September, it's bloody hot. A lot of things don't want to flower. It's dry. Sometimes we can't water too much, but you can always depend on snow in the mountain. And yes, it's weedy, can be weedy. Yes, if you're raising bees, this is not your favorite plant because it turns the honey can become bitter because of the pollen in there. or the nectar. However, it's so copious with nectar that every wasp, every butterfly, everything that can't find anything else to feed on in August is going to come to the snow on the mountain. Once you get some snow on the mountain in your garden, you're going to have it for a while. But again, it will kind of peter itself out. The nice thing about it being an annual is you can kind of maintain it. Don't let the seeds drop if you get too much of it. But it is a wonderful plant as a transitional plant from summer, spring, summer into fall. So keep that in mind. Again, this is by doing your research in your area. I'm trying to hurry here because it's getting late. A few others, here's some other examples of multiple flowers and multiple heads, going back to the whole composite thing. These are some great examples of plants that you can grow. And I will tell you that prairie goldenrod, Maximilian sunflower especially, when you take them out of their native settings and you plop them into a garden that's nice and pristine and doesn't have a lot of competition, they become weedy. Keep that in mind. Native plants can become as weedy as dandelion because we're taking them from where they normally have to compete with everybody into a more pristine environment. So you have to make sure that you know that and manage for it as you make your selections. And then going back to the seasonality of fall for monarchs, going back to monarchs, as they migrate through the state, they're gaining fat by feeding on nectar. And two of the most important plants here in Texas are the cowpen daisy and the frostweed. Enough said about that. Now, a couple of other considerations. Here we have two great plants. There probably isn't a person in this presentation that doesn't like these two plants. One of the considerations you want to do when you're putting together your plan is what grows in your ecoregion. Select that first because the insects that live in your ecoregion are adapted to those ecoregion level plants. However, there are always going to be a few native plants that grow really well outside of their normal range. You'll notice by this arrow that the only county purple coneflower is considered a native plant of is the far northeast county in Texas. And I've seen it in that county, which is really cool. So I've seen it in its actual place. And then Greg's blue mist, which is planted in every garden across the state, it seems like, is actually more of South Texas into West Texas plant where it's native. There are other mist flowers that are native to the hill country and other places, but this is the popular one we see in our garden centers. So both of these are very popular. And they adapt well to most of the conditions. So yeah, you're going to have the opportunity to play outside the boundary a little bit, but be cautious, be thoughtful when you do that. All right, so when you're doing your application, when you're planning your area, don't ignore woody plants or bunch grasses. Both add structure and are hosts for pollinators. Bunch grasses in particular for a variety of moths and skippers, and also the members of like the wood nymph and some of those guys as well, Carolina satyr and whatnot. Remember that those things we often called weeds, such as straggler daisy and frog fruit and cowpen daisy and snow on the mountain, as I've already talked about, very important for pollinators. I always suggest don't overdo your garden, don't overdo the maintenance of your garden, don't overmanage it. Let nature have its way to some degree. You'll get better results that way, I believe. Again, we're focused on providing new habitat for pollinators. You want to make sure you consider sun exposure and even wind, because we can get some pretty drying winds, and when they're beaten down by the sun at the same time, that becomes an issue for some of these plants if they're not really well adapted to those conditions. Again, look at plants that produce nectar, but also serve as host plants for butterflies, and then focus on diversity of species and time of flowering. Figure out who's going to be blooming in February, if you're living here, all the way through November and even into December. If you're in the panhandle, it's a little different situation. Your window's shorter. But think about that for your given area. All right, some more considerations. Select plants that have heads with multiple flowers. I beat that to death with you. Deep flowers versus shallow flowers. We've already talked about that. That provide nectar sources at different seasons or over long periods of time. Select plants of different heights just to add the pleasing of the eye, if you will. And then gather seeds or purchase plants from local sources. Stay away from plants treated with neonics. And then remember again, I've already said it once, diversity begets diversity. Now, let's talk about seeds versus plants real briefly, and we're getting close here. Seeds are economic. You can buy packets of seeds, but they do not provide instant wows. And we've got it, when you apply for this, they expect a report at the end of the first year. And if you've done nothing but seeds, you may not have much to show for it photographically or otherwise. So, and then the other thing that you have to keep in mind with seeds, when you buy seeds, check to see what's in the packet. A lot of times these seed companies will use filler like Mexican hat or blanket flower, both beautiful flowers in their own right, but they're very aggressive. They will also, the ones you buy at Home Depot, and I'm not trying to throw Home Depot under the bus, I'm just being realistic, at those box stores, sometimes it'll say native plants seeds. And you look in there and there are California poppies and a few things like that. Put it back and go find the right seed packets. Okay, focus on native plant seeds from here. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you buy a packet of seeds, they are not ready to go, especially if they're perennials. They need to go through stratification. I'm sure a lot of you know that. And stratification needs to, most of the time it's cool, moist stratification. So if you're going to get your seeds, put them in the ground in the fall so nature can do its process of going ahead and stratifying them. If you're worried about the mice or rodents or the wind blowing the seeds away, the rodents eating them, a thin layer of straw or something like that can help keep the moisture in, keep them cooler, hopefully more protected from roaming birds and high winds. Keep that in mind. If you can't do it that way, put them in a baggie with some sand, moisten the sand, mix the seeds in there, put it in a refrigerator for usually about 6 weeks, pull them out. You can either then spread it on the ground with the sand, or you can put them in flats and then germinate them and then watch them grow up and then put them out as seedlings. So different ways of doing it. But I wouldn't go just seeds if you can manage. Get some native plants to put in there to give a little pop of color, or some woody plants. And I know you're going to see a map later that shows where native growers are, and they're not everywhere in Texas. So that provides some challenges for certain parts of the state, at least on this list. So the last thing I want to talk about specifically is this whole thing about cultivar nativar. I'm not going to say it. Native plants, the true natives versus cultivars, which are now fancily being called nativars to make it seem like they're okay. Are they good or not? Native plants are plants that originally occurred within a region as a result of natural processes rather than human intervention. A cultivar / nativar is a plant selected for a certain trait, either prettier colors, double petals, changing the color of the leaves or the shape or the size of the plant, the growth habit. The problem when you start altering nature is that if you're going to alter nature to bigger flowers, something's got to give within that plant. And a lot of times it's nectar and it's pollen. Now, that is not every plant. We have not researched every plant by any stretch, but I'm not even going to call them that. I hate that term. There, I said it. Cultivars, because nativar just sounds like an excuse to plant a plant that's not really native. Cultivars, and HEB sells some cultivars in their wild plants. I'm not going to, it just is. It is. They're out there. Henry Dewberg is a cultivar of our mealy blue sage. My wife just bought 6 of them. I told her, take them back. I'm not putting them with my native ones, because here's some of the problems that are starting to present themselves in the ones that have been researched. If you take a cultivar that has a different genetic makeup and it intermingles with the native plant, there's the possibility that if that swamps the genetics of the native plant, you lose the native plant in those localized areas, which means you have less nectar, less pollen. The plant, if the characteristics of the taste of the leaves for the pollen, for the caterpillar changes, they may not feed on them. So you are doing a disservice to the pollinators. I know you're trying to make your garden pretty, but we're also, in this example, we're trying to make our garden for the pollinators first and for our eyes second. But that's my strong opinion, in case you didn't notice that was an opinion. But there is factual evidence that some of these cultivars are potentially, can potentially hurt our native plants in localized settings. So I just want to put it out there so that you're understanding that. Now, the last thing, consideration of fencing. Texas has way too many deer in large parts of the state. Most of the country is overgrazed by deer. And most of the country, if they put in native plants, they've got to put some kind of fencing or they don't have a garden. So you're going to have to think about this. This is a beautiful garden at Cibolo Nature Center. I thought when they put this in, I knew it was going to be a beautiful garden, and oh my God, is it? But I thought that fence was overkill, but there's never been a deer in there. And it's a spectacular garden from the get-go. The plants that they have on the outside of the fence are things the deer don't feed on. So keep that in mind as well. So that is something that has to be considered if you're going to have a successful native planting in Texas. Now, a few things to think about. Take advantage of small spaces. Again, we're trying to increase space, so you don't have to go out and find 5 acres to do. That's an impossible thing with $4,000 and with a year. But find those small spaces. This is what's blooming in my yard in this tiny little space in the spring, summer, and fall. So what I've done is I've taken advantage of a small space and I've diversified so that when those flowers blooming there that were blooming there a couple of days ago are done, other plants are taking their place. So again, spread out the season even in a small patch like that. Then you've got here's a garden piece in front of my house that has a combination of herbaceous and woody plants. Again, I'm looking at spring, summer, and fall. You'll notice several of those species bloom spring, summer, and fall. So I'm trying to maximize the length of flowering to maximize my diversity of pollinators throughout the growing season. You can also consider layers, and this is more of a wild effect, okay? Clearly, this is against my back fence, but I've got a lot of woody shrubs in here. It adds diversity. It adds cover for birds that might be attracted. It adds cover for the pollinators. On the ground, there may be small solitary bees that find some bare soil that they're going to lay their eggs in holes. This can be a nice enhancement, and it's a visual thing as well. It doesn't have to be quite that wild, but you know, in this case it is. When possible, and water is always going to be an issue in Texas, add some water. But if you're going to add water, I've seen gardens where they just put out a bowl of water and then it's a death trap for any bird or anything else that comes in there. Because if you eat birds or you're a predator, all you have to do is sit and wait for something to land at the water. They got no chance of escape. And so we started out with no plant cover. We now have all kinds of things growing around it. They're pollinator plants, provides cover, a sense of cover and shelter. This counts for pollinators as well as for birds. So think about that. But keep in mind, if you're going to have this, how are you going to keep it moving when you have drought conditions? So that's a really, really important consideration. So you have to be cautious there. Now, you can go with different kinds of arrangements of your gardens. We put the little border here to give it a little structure. We had some people come and look at our gardens the other day, and one guy looked at that garden here and said, "Oh, that's so beautiful." Well, let me wait until the next slide. I think the next slide's even more beautiful, but his opinion was different. But again, looking at things that are spring, host plants, summer, fall, some are woody, some are perennials, herbaceous perennials. And then here's the garden I think is the best. This is kind of the true wildscape. Things are just doing what they're doing in here. We notice we put a bench in here, just like they had at the garden here at Cibolo, where people can sit and actually reflect and enjoy it. And I would strongly encourage you to do something that gets people to stop and observe. There's no sense in putting this in and going to $4,000 worth of expense if nobody's going to sit around and watch it. The whole part is you're benefiting the pollinators, but you're also trying to educate the public and also educate yourself. So again, lots and lots of considerations and different ways of doing these things. Here's the inside of the Cibolo garden. I did include this photograph. There's that lovely bench. They have a nice path around here. I'll go out at lunch and sit there and read a book in the shade and watch the various pollinators fly around. It's a lovely little garden. And again, it's not that big. You can vary your size, but it was a new pollinator garden just a couple of years ago. Before that, there was basically nothing there. Post-establishment considerations, as you can tell, I'm getting close to the end. Track what species disappear, survive, or thrive. Document pollinators, and I know you can't identify them all the species. There's no way, but do the best you can. And other critters using the space. Create an iNaturalist project to encourage others that visit, not just you. Let it fall on the visitors as well to take pictures, and that will go on to the project. You'll get to learn about diversity at that site. When you consider winter maintenance, a lot of insects go under the leaves. They burrow into the dead stems, and there's that whole movement of leave the leaves. I encourage it. It is tempting to want to clean it up. A lot of us have this European descent where apparently everything's supposed to be mowed to the inch. I try to fight that every year. I sometimes lose that battle. but there are ways around that. So consider your plan. How are you going to maintain it during the winter when it's not nearly as pretty as it is in the summer? But if you use an iNaturalist project, like I've done right here at my house, I have 678 species, including the plants I planted in that project, and the majority of them are insects. So have I been successful with a concerted effort? Yes. There are wonderful guides out there. Texas Parks and Wildlife has this guide that I don't know, not many people know about, but it's an amazing guide for using for native pollinators in Texas. You can just type in TPWD pollinators. It'll lead you to a page that'll lead you to the link. It's a PDF, download it. You will love it. And then I want to recommend these two books if you're looking to try to figure out what plants you can use that combine beauty and nectar and pollen and our host plants for butterflies and moths. The Webbers have put together two wonderful resources, so I encourage you to investigate those. And they're good. They have plants from all around the state of Texas, so do check that out. It will save you a lot of time. Of course, there are two wonderful websites, the Native Plant Database on the NIPSOT site and the Wildflower Center. They have native plants, all kinds of information. Again, here's an example of using a QR code to get people to link to that, to one of these two websites to learn more about those individual plants. I encourage you to do that. That's a wonderful form of education and non-formal interpretation. Now, also on the webpage for NIPSOT, they have a nice nursery, this whole list of nice nurseries. Notice that West Texas isn't well represented. If you know somebody that's growing native plants here, encourage them to sign up on this webpage so they can get credit for growing native plants. So keep that in mind. And the final thing I just want to mention, I've joined this, Doug Tallamy. I know a lot of you are disciples of Doug Tallamy. He's amazing. He started this homegrown national park. He's written some wonderful books as well. I encourage you to look at those. But he started his homegrown national park with the thought that if all of us can do a little something, we can make a huge difference. What you're doing by taking on this challenge to write a grant proposal and make the world better for pollinators and native plants and educating our public, you can then put that in a project like this. And it's no big deal, it doesn't cost any money, it's completely voluntary, but you'll know that other people are going to recognize it. And I do believe there'll come a day when people are traveling and are sightseeing, they're going to be using this website to go see native plant gardens around the country, wherever they are. So again, just check it out, it's worth it. All right, I know I talked way too long. Oh my God, did I talk way too long for the time frame we had, but I think I kept it about 45 minutes, so I don't think I did.
There is never too long for you. There is
Well,
never too long for you. Seriously, we could go another couple of hours. People were asking for it. I don't think you could though, because I think we're all getting to that point of the night and getting hungry.
Right, exactly.
And I can't even say thank you enough as you've got City Nature Challenge.
That's right, starts at midnight.
Starts at midnight. Can you give
right.
just a quick elevator plug for City Nature Challenge if folks don't know about it?
Absolutely. Here, let me see if I can find you. I'm still online. Yeah, I'm talking to you. There you are. Okay, I couldn't figure out which button I should push. Good Lord. Okay, notice how dark it's gotten. It's gonna rain. It's gonna rain.
It's been raining here.
Oh good. City Nature Challenge starts tonight at midnight. It goes through Monday at midnight. And then there's a week of helping identify what people have seen over the course of the week. We have somewhere around 15 or 16 metropolitan areas in Texas that are participating this year. Basically, it's an invitation to go outside with your camera, and iNaturalist, take a picture. They prefer wild things, but they're not going to, like come hunt you down if you're taking a picture of something in your garden. But wild plants and animals, take a picture of it. Put it on iNaturalist. If you're within one of the metro areas, it's automatically going to go into that and count for that particular metro area. I will say I live in the San Antonio area. Last year, we were #1 in the United States. We were certainly #1 in Texas. And we were 3rd globally for the number of observations. So I present this to everyone out there, whether you are in Wichita Falls or El Paso, or dare I say Austin, or Houston, or Dallas, Fort Worth. Come at us, come at us, come at us. See what you can do.
The challenge has been
has been dropped down. Wizzy, by the way, is in our area too. So I promise over the next 4 days, I will not wander into another metro area
The gauntlet has been
The
thrown.
gauntlet is thrown down. So
Love
anyway. But it's a fun event. Just get out and explore, and do your best and have fun. It's just a way to get out and explore nature. So take advantage of it. Take advantage of it.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all both so much. And I'm going to leave it to Hannah to wrap us up and say just thank you from me first.
Yeah, again, thank y'all so much. That was some great information that I'm sure our chapters are going to really use in these applications this year. And so just thank y'all so much for going above and beyond with the communication of that information. Y'all did a really great job. So moving forward, this webinar has been recorded and we'll try to get that posted on our website, hopefully by the end of tomorrow. And again, if you're interested in applying, I highly recommend that y'all refer to that website and go over all those project considerations. It has all the information regarding the project on there, so it's a great resource. I think that's all I have to say. I know it's getting late.
To see what projects come out of this, out of
Exactly.
our chapters.
Hey, and Hannah, thanks for all the work you're doing on this. So
Mhm.
you've done a wonderful job piecing this together and wrangling all the things that need to be wrangled, including presenters and that kind of stuff. So well done on your part.
Thank you. Yeah, again, just thank y'all so much. This has been really a great opportunity for our chapters, and I really appreciate y'all taking the time this evening. So,
Wonderful. Y'all have a wonderful night and enjoy the rain if you get some.
I hope so. Good luck, everybody. Take care.
Oh,
Thanks, Wizzy.
thanks, Craig. I was taking notes, so I
It's
got
always
some
good
tasks.
it's always good to share the stage with you. So